back. Thank you so much for staying tuned. You're watching Namibia Connects. Now, as the world rapidly embraces the fourth industrial revolution, the role for artificial intelligence in education is becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. From personalized learning to supporting teachers and improving access to quality education, AI is reshaping how knowledge is delivered and consumed globally. Joining us in studio is Vitalis Haupindi, the founder and CEO of YYeni AI, a homegrown education technology initiative, who will now shed more light on how AI can support learners, empower educators, and help transform education outcomes in Namibia. Vitalis, good morning and welcome to Namibia Connects.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So tell us, how did you firstly come up with this image? What was the motive behind it?
It started a couple of years ago, almost maybe 4 or 5, with my interest in education. When I was in high school, actually, that's more like 8 years ago, I used to tutor my classmates, and I had a passion for learning during that time. I got a nickname called Professor. So when I went to university, I thought, okay, I need to work on something. And it was very easy to pick and choose, because at that time a new curriculum was being introduced, and so there was a lot of learners failing. And so I thought, okay, I actually had worked on tutoring in school and I really loved it. So maybe let me build something in technology, because I was studying computer science actually at the time at NAST. And so I thought, let me build something in technology to help solve this problem. So we started working on connecting learners to teachers from other schools. So instead, if maybe you don't understand the way the teacher at your school is explaining, you can reach out to another teacher. That was called the Teach Learn program. We worked with over 200 teachers, trained over 21 schools. But we realized at that point in time it wasn't enough, because it was requiring teachers to do more work, and they were already overworked. And so then AI came, and we thought, okay, this is the opportunity to now use artificial intelligence to actually do the tutoring, but also assist the teachers in reducing a lot of the administrative work. And so that was the birth of YYeni, and we started that in August, or rather September actually, of 2023, and we launched on the 9th of September. And since then we've been researching and developing and deploying it in schools, and working with schools, both private and government schools, and individual parents who buy our services for home tutoring. And so that's really the genesis and the story from there up until now.
Why do you believe artificial intelligence is no longer an option but a necessity for the future of the education of Namibia?
I mean, if you were just to take a look out and you see what the leading countries are doing and have been doing for years, but more particularly since 2021, since we started the AI revolution, the rise of ChatGPT, the countries and governments like the US and Asian countries and China specifically have demanded and set up policies to get schools to actually integrate AI into the schools, because the next generation of workforces, even starting right now, the next generation of employees will have to be empowered. And so being empowered means you need to be able to not only understand and believe that there's something called AI, but you should actually be able to use it. And, but you should use it to a way to increase productivity and increase the output of the company you're working for. So from that perspective, we need them to be aware that there is this new technology, because that's what you will have to use in the workplace. But more importantly, artificial intelligence allows us to be able to provide what education has failed to do for almost everywhere around the world for the past 200 years. That is providing personalized attention. In the genesis of education, when it really started, we had Plato being tutored, with Socrates tutoring Plato, and Plato tutoring Aristotle. Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great, and these were all great men who created really great names for themselves. But it's because they were given personalized attention, and we were not able to scale this to the masses. But in the 1800s, when the Industrial Revolution started, we wanted to provide education to everyone. It was a noble goal. But by providing education to everyone in large class sizes, 30 learners, 40 learners being taught by one teacher, it meant that we lost the magic of one-on-one tutoring. And the teacher is now teaching or broadcasting the message to everyone, while learners are at different levels with respect to the concept. And so artificial intelligence has now the ability to allow us to go back to the roots of education, where the kings and queens of that time hired experts for their kids to teach them one-on-one. Now the governments could do that. You could have AI deployed to tutor each individual learner in the classroom during school hours, and reskill teachers to be able to be the drivers and accountability officers in making sure that learning happens in these kinds of environments. And so for that reason, I mean, many people have often said that education doesn't change, and it has been like that for 200 years. But right now, educators themselves around the world have now realized that AI is sort of a forcing function to actually to now think and reform education, really think about it, rethink it from first principle on how we can design an education system where we now have the power to provide one-on-one attention to everyone. And so it's very obvious and visible to everyone. And so I think that's why we should consider the opportunity to research, because it's not a silver bullet. You actually have to figure out how to put AI into the classroom. And so we have to do that part, but we just can't sit and wait for people from somewhere else to come and give us a solution. We have to investigate it ourselves.
Now, coming back to classroom, YYeni AI, how can it practically help teachers in a classroom rather than, replacing them?
Yeah. And so I think the word is not replace. I think rather is, I don't think there's any technology that could actually at this point in time replace the teacher in the classroom, but there could be a reclassification of the job. What does the new role of the teacher becomes? And I do think it's still, a large part of it will still be teaching, but the most biggest part of it will be connecting with students and setting up these learning goals and helping tailor the AI to teach these learners specifically where they are. We have 40 learners in a classroom, and if a teacher goes, let's say this is grade 10, and the teacher goes up in front and is teaching what we call fractions. And those learners are on different levels. Some of them were transferred to that grade. Some of them passed, maybe they passed with a D or C, and they were moved to, they just barely passed, and they're now in grade 10. Some of those learners actually don't understand what a denominator or numerator is. That's concepts taught in grade 6, grade 7. And so if a teacher is now teaching what we call algebraic fraction, which is a much higher order thinking task, the learner who doesn't understand the basics of grade 5, grade 6, it's like you're building a house. Now you're building a house with a foundation that is very shaky, and now you're adding the roof algebraic fraction. That's not going to stand. So the teacher cannot take in the 40 minutes that they have actually say, okay, let me teach these 2-3 kids that don't understand what the numerator denominator is. Let me teach them these concepts from grade 6 or 8. The teacher doesn't have the time to do that. But with AI in the classroom, the teacher could deliver and instruct tools such as YYeni. There are many other tools and companies around the world working on this to build tools that the teacher could use in the classroom and say, okay, let me instruct this tool so that it teaches Johannes this, but Vitalis or Festus, who's already way ahead, can do algebraic fraction while others are getting helped. Because if you just teach algebraic fraction to a learner who doesn't even understand the basics of fractions, there's no use. It's like a waste of time for the teacher, for the learner. And so they need to build a solid foundation on that. Now, because most of the times they are pushed ahead, or most of the times they just barely pass. As the grades go up, the higher you go in the grades, the more difficult the concept becomes. So if you haven't mastered the concept in the previous grade, it's difficult to be able to understand these things. And so what teachers can then, so teachers have that as a tool to help them tailor that lesson to that learner. But also with tools such as YYeni, we allow teachers to be able to give assessments much faster. So a teacher will take maybe two days to prepare a test, and then learners write it, and then the teacher will take a week to mark the test. With YYeni, the teacher can take 20 minutes to create a test. Print it out, let the learners write, and then the learners can write that test, and in at least less than 2 hours, by just taking pictures of each learner's answers, the learners could be marked, and they can get instant feedback. Right now, the data is there. As soon as the teacher is done marking, maybe sometimes they do corrections, sometimes they don't because of time, then the data just remains on that paper, and we file it and we throw it away next year. But if we just keep that data and we see where the learner failed, and then we can integrate that back into the learner's learning program. And you can all do that digitally, and we are doing that with YYeni. You can basically create a learning feedback loop for that specific learner, where that learner is receiving world-class education, just like as if he was
Which is also a good opportunity for the teacher, like you said, to help that student before the final exam.
Yep. In addition to that, the teacher then can also get tutored and trained by YYeni as part of continuous professional development to see what kind of lesson hooks and cues they can come up with to be able to teach this group of learners who are struggling in this approach. So then the teacher will be engaging back and forth with YYeni, and they eventually come up with a lesson plan that they can file and that they can use to deliver lessons that are specifically tailored to groups of learners.
Now, what skills do learners gain from early exposure to AI-powered learning tools? And how does this prepare them for the future, especially not just school, but the market itself?
That's a great question. There's this great venture capitalist called Paul Graham. He speaks about living at the edge of the future. And this is the edge. A learner who's engaging with AI tools right now is living at the very edge, or the bleeding edge of what AI tools are able to do today, because 10 months, a year from now, they're going to be doing something different. So living at the edge of the future allows learners to appreciate and get them as close as being a prophet, I should say, because now they can, compared to other learners who are not using this, they can sort of see where the future is going ahead, and they can prepare themselves mentally, but also they can be able to see opportunities and capitalize on these opportunities. And they are already learning these skills on how to work with these tools, and it will help them complete projects outside school, complete work that is relevant to an employer, and work that even people that are already doing that are employed, a learner who knows how to use AI can do that job better than someone who's employed. And that gives them just an added advantage to get a better job or get a first-hand entry into the job.
Now, data privacy and ethical concerns are often raised around AI. How does YYeni AI ensure the safety and protection of learners' information?
So the question on data ethics for us is, we only use data to improve the learning process for that specific learner. We don't use data like in the era of social networks in the 2000s, in the early 2000s and 2010s, social media platforms like Facebook and the rest, as a way of generating revenues for themselves, they had to sell the data of their users so that actually they can make money as a company. But the way our business model is set up is that we don't get paid for data. We get paid for actually delivering one-on-one tutoring that actually works in the learner's past. And so the use case for us in terms of data for these learners' data is to make sure that the AI is learning as much as possible about that learner to help them be able to master the next concept and the next concept and the next concept that's getting difficult and difficult and difficult. And so on top of that, we do a lot of data encryption and protection in terms of how we store the data, and we anonymize the data when we send it to third parties for processing or any kind of operations.
Now, what role should government, schools, and the private sector play in integrating AI into Namibia's education system?
That's a great question. I think governments, separate. I think governments, the private sector in terms of industry players like telcos, not necessarily the private schools, I think those guys can build the roads. And I want to use this analogy. They should build the roads and make sure learners can get devices, make sure they can get internet, fund programs that do that. And then companies like us, which private companies should build the cars that will drive on these roads. And then the teachers should become the drivers. They should be trained to be able to use tools like YYeni to be able to drive on the roads and the infrastructures that the companies provide in terms of the internet and in terms of devices. So the government should play its role to ensure that learners across rural areas, because right now only learners who are in Windhoek per se, or in a lot of bigger towns could get access to a device and then access to internet, and therefore by just doing that they have access to an AI. But the learner in the rural communities do not have access to this, and that's unfair, and it shouldn't be that way. And most often, a lot of government school teachers, they will never want to go teach in the rural communities. So that means the most experienced teachers who are also often have taught for a long time, they are probably married, so they are going to stay in a bigger town. They won't go teach this learner. So it's usually early teachers who are beginning up in their career who will take any job in the bushes, and as soon as they are settled, they will actually go.
So it's more of bridging the gap.
Yep. And I think you are going to see a fundamental shift if we bring AI technologies to rural communities, because there's a very famous research done called the Two Sigma problem. It's done in 1984, almost 43 years ago. It proved that if you just provide one-on-one attention to every learner, these learners can perform better, 98% better than the learners taught in a traditional classroom. If you do that to every school in the rural communities, they can do 98% better than classrooms where they are taught with one teacher standing on the board, teaching 30, 40 learners, 20 learners even. And for the private schools, I think it's time that private schools embrace what private education was for. When the king of Macedonia in the 4th century hired Aristotle to tutor his son, it was one-on-one tutoring. Government schools will go back to ensuring that the class sizes are small. I mean, this doesn't make sense for government school to have 30 learners, 35 learners in a classroom. It's the same thing as some of the government schools where they have 30, 34 learners. It should be small classes, because that means the teacher can give undivided attention to a learner. And so private schools that are big and they have 30, 40 learners in the classroom should embrace AI technology so they can get back to the roots of actually providing that one-on-one attention to their learners and not just be 34 learners, just like in a private government school where there's 34 learners in a class.
Looking ahead, what is your long-term vision for YYeni AI and the broader role of AI in transforming education in Namibia?
I'll start with the broader role of AI in education. I think what AI has to do, this is what someone else has taught me, and we've spoken a lot about these ideas. AI has the potential to do for education what we call mobile money did for Nigeria and for Kenya in 2007 to 2014, where they were able to drastically bank almost everyone across the country because they introduced this. And so if governments across Africa, across the continent, in fact, especially across Africa, where you have so many learners in one classroom, by just embracing AI, they could provide the same quality. It doesn't even matter the same quality of education, because the AI is smarter than most humans, including even elite professors at world-class universities. So we have AI that's smarter than those professors. Why don't you just give it and let it teach your students across the continent? And that's immediately going to equalize and set the playing field fair. In terms of our vision for YYeni, we are now expanding. We are looking at 8 countries in Southern Africa, where we are able to support them across their national curriculums and across international curriculums like Cambridge and the IB. And our work is, we're going to continue doing that. But more importantly, we're going to continue doing research to figure out how different schools, different countries, with respect to their context, can put AI into place to work, because it's not something that you just buy off the shelf and put in there. You want to customize it to the context of that school, to the context of that country. And so we're going to continue doing research such as that and sharing it. We've just completed the research in Lutherans, and we'll be publishing the paper very soon in the next 2 weeks to share with the public.